Less than 2 weeks ago, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan into law. He ushered in some of the most transformative economic policies to come out of Washington in generations. By expanding access to and eligibility for the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, the American Rescue Plan is going to lift 10 million kids above or closer to the poverty line and put money in the pockets of 17 million American workers across the country. I want to start out by noting that both the low income and middle income families and workers potentially qualify for these credits, and they will be issued periodically via check and direct deposit. American workers should know this was a profound change that will benefit you. American workers also have to know that they won't have to wait until next year. You won't have to start to see advance payments of these credits 6, 7, 10 months down. You'll see it as early as July. And because of the changes that we made, if you didn't previously qualify because you didn't have a high enough income, you could be eligible now. I'm so proud to be here today alongside Senators Brown, Bennett, Senator Warnock, the president presiding, who are a large part responsible for this powerful lifeline to the American people, and critically, for our children. Senator Bennett, Senator Brown, Senator Warnock, thank you. You are champions who have been fighting in and out of the Senate and understand not just the economic urgency, but the moral urgency to address poverty. And that is really what we're all here to talk about, the urgency of the crisis of poverty and specifically child poverty. In America, this is unacceptable. The wealthiest nation on the planet of Earth, the question of poverty is not one of inevitability. It is one of policy choice. It's not if we can do something, it's will we do something. Tonight, I'm going home to Newark, driving very soon, where I've lived over the past 20 years. I'm proud to call Newark home. I'm proud to be a part of a community of people who take care of each other. I'm proud to be part of a community that is rich with dignity, rich with activism and intellect and engagement, but we're also a community, like so many others in America, that still struggles. According to the last census, the median income for the census tract that I live in was about $14,000 per household. And that was before the dual public health and economic crises of the COVID pandemic. And in my community, like many others, urban and rural, across America, adults aren't the only ones struggling. Our kids are too. In fact, the poorest age group in America is our children, with 1 in 6 American kids living in poverty. It is nothing less than a moral obscenity that the richest nation in the world should have the highest rates of child poverty in the developed world. For adults, poverty has a technical definition. It's a federally defined guideline, an amount of annual income that you fall under that also takes into account how many people are in your household. For kids, poverty is defined by what they experience every single day, what happens to them. It's growing up being more likely to deal with food insecurity, not knowing where your next meal will come from or when it will come. It's facing housing insecurity. A quarter of kids living in poverty will have gone through an eviction before they turn 15 years old. Kids in poverty have worse health outcomes, worse educational outcomes, and are more likely to become entrapped in our broken criminal justice system. And kids who grow up in poverty are more likely to be poor as adults. Study after study has shown how children who live in poverty have higher levels of stress hormones, The stress of poverty literally affects their brains. It inhibits brain development. It is violence against the brain of a child. One child poverty expert described the stress hormones that are constantly released in kids growing up in poverty as similar to the feeling that an adult would get after a car crash every single day. This is violence. We know that when a child experiences poverty, there is a lifelong psychological and physiological effects they carry with them. Study after study after study has borne this out. For kids, poverty is literally dangerous for their development, dangerous for their health, and could have permanent and lasting damage to their brains. And the cruelty of this crisis is that no parent would ever choose that for their child. Poor parents do not choose for their kids to experience the daily trauma of poverty. They do not choose to condemn their kids to a life of worse education outcomes, worse health outcomes. What we must understand that child poverty is not a choice that low-income parents make. It is a failure of our country to take collective responsibility for the well-being of American children. This is a moral sin. It is not a sin to be poor, but a sin to tolerate such poverty in our communities. Almost 2 weeks ago, Congress and President Biden made the choice to do something about this American sin, this unacceptable reality, this moral obscenity, the violence happening to so many children. They did something about it. We did something about it in the American Rescue Plan. And now we are calling on we are on our way for a year to cut child poverty in half. For black children, more than in half, 52%. For Hispanic children, by 45%. For Native American children, by 62%. That's millions of kids across the country who will not face the violence of poverty. In New Jersey, that's 89,000 kids and their families who are not just going to be lifted out of poverty, but will be given the opportunities and the freedoms that come with being able to build a life and a future without the trauma that comes with poverty. That's why we're together here this afternoon, because lifting kids out of poverty is not just about ending a crisis, but beginning a new American tradition of giving every child what every child should have in America as a birthright. It's about creating freedom and liberty from the oppression of poverty. We have the power to do this. We have the tools to do it, and we know it makes good economic sense to get kids and adults out of poverty. I love what James Baldwin wrote. He said, anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how expensive it is to be poor. Well, that's also true for our country. Whether we realize it or not, child poverty is expensive for all of us, costing our country $1.1 trillion every year. But investing in ending poverty benefits us all. Every dollar spent on combating child poverty saves this nation $7 down the road. $1 invested saves us $7 later. Our countries, our peers, have made these kind of investments in children and families and have reaped rewards that we are denying ourselves. Expanding the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit and making them permanent are proven, data-driven, evidence-based, result-apparent ways to respond to some of the most morally and economically urgent challenges of the United States of America. These are the kinds of investments in our people that will change life trajectories and have a ripple effect for generations yet to come. If you give a child fertile ground on which to grow, they will blossom and reap a harvest beyond our imaginations. But if you punish them in the trauma, in the violence of poverty, you decimate not just their destinies, but all of our destinies. I am so grateful to have champions that are here today alongside me in this effort. And together, I know this is a crisis we are going to meet, and this crisis we can overcome. I'm proud of the work we have done. Now we should make those changes to the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit permanent. I'm proud, Mr. President, to pass the microphone and the moment on to a great champion of the Child Tax Credit and the Earned Income Tax Credit, one of the original authors of the legislation that was pulled for our recovery plan, and that is the Senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown.